Imagine being told by the highest levels of your government that your nation's military has absolute, uncontested supremacy in the skies.
Right, like total dominance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're assured the enemy's air defenses have been completely decimated, the airspace is secure, it's, a done deal.
Yeah.
But then you open your phone, scroll through your feed, and you see a selfie.
Oh, man, yeah.
It's this high-definition photo taken by an enemy civilian just grinning right next to the smoking, recognizable wreckage of an American fighter jet's ejection seat.
It creates this massive cognitive dissonance that just completely fractures the official narrative. And in modern warfare, I mean, that image propagates globally before the Pentagon even has a chance to draft an initial press release, let alone control the spin.
Right. And that specific contrast between the sanitized, invincible version of the war we are being sold and the chaotic, highly visible reality unfolding on the ground, that is exactly what we are unpacking today. Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Glad to be here.
Our mission today is to cut through the massive fog of war surrounding the ongoing U.S.-Iran conflict. We're looking at a scenario where state-of-the-art military technology is basically colliding head-on with the decentralized reality of the modern information age.
Yeah, and to do this, we are synthesizing a very specific stack of sources for you. We're looking at a broadcast transcript from left-wing political commentator Vaush, a CNN news segment that features a former combat pilot, and a really blistering investigative report from The Intercept by Nick Turse.
And I want to jump in right here just to make something super clear to you listening. Since we are pulling from commentators like Vaush on the left, various administration officials on the right, and independent investigative journalism sitting somewhere in between, our mission today isn't to validate anyone's politics.
Exactly.
We're absolutely not taking sides here. We're not endorsing these viewpoints. We're making political judgments about the current administration. We are acting strictly as impartial guides.
Right. We're just extracting the raw data, the tactical shifts, and the strategic arguments that these sources are bringing to the table.
Right.
Because it's about giving you the analytical framework to understand the information landscape of this conflict. Because right now, the war over the narrative is proving to be as volatile and, well, deeply contested as the physical battlefield itself.
Absolutely. So let's start with that shattered illusion of air supremacy.
Yeah, let's get into it.
The sources point to a major tactical event. An F-15E Strike Eagle fighter bomber was shot down over Iran. And according to the CNN source, this marks the first time a U.S. aircraft has been shot down by enemy fire in this specific conflict.
Right.
Though looking at the data, the whole enemy fire distinction is doing a lot of heavy lifting here, especially because of what happened earlier in the campaign.
Oh, you're referring to the friendly fire incidents. Yeah, the Vaush broadcast highlighted this bizarre anomaly that the mainstream media seemed to largely gloss over. Prior to this enemy shootdown, 3 U.S. F-15s were actually mistakenly shot down by friendly Kuwaiti air defenses.
3 entire F-15s lost to a coalition partner's air defense grid.
It's staggering.
I mean, that immediately suggests a massive breakdown in IFF-identify friend or foe protocols. Like if the airspace is that chaotic that our own allies are painting and firing upon American jets, the command and control architecture is already heavily strained.
Yeah, without a doubt.
But setting that friendly fire anomaly aside for a second, this new incident is fundamentally different. An F-15E was brought down by Iranian surface-to-air capabilities, and the administration just claimed Iran's military was 100% decimated. We were supposed to be operating in uncontested airspace. It's like they thought they were playing a video game on easy mode, and suddenly the enemy is hitting impossible trick shots.
That's a really good way to put it. The political rhetoric projected absolute dominance. It was operating on the assumption that the early U.S. and Israeli strikes permanently blinded Iranian radar and just, destroyed their missile silos.
Right.
But the battlefield reality detailed in these sources shows something entirely different. U.S. intelligence indicates that Iran is rapidly digging out and repairing their underground missile bunkers.
Okay, wait. I found that really hard to believe. You can't just patch up a bunker that took a direct hit from a bunker-busting munition. We are talking about thousands of pounds of reinforced concrete.
Well, yeah, but it's not necessarily about rebuilding the entire concrete structure from scratch. It's about modularity and redundancy. The intelligence suggests they are restoring operational capacity within hours.
Hours?
Yeah. They are pulling reserve mobile launchers out of deep storage and integrating them right back into surviving radar networks. Furthermore, they're demonstrating the capability to actively track modern U.S. aircraft. I mean, this wasn't just an unguided rocket lobbed into the sky hoping to hit something. This was a coordinated technological intercept of a highly advanced electronic warfare-capable fighter bomber.
And it's clearly not an isolated lucky shot either.
No, not at all.
When you look at the sheer volume of aircraft incidents mentioned in the sources that occurred within a single 24-hour window,
Yeah.
I mean, the concept of American air invincibility just evaporates.
It really does.
We aren't just talking about the F-15E here. We have an A-10 Warhog crashing into the Persian Gulf.
Yeah.
Then a second A-10 takes a direct hit from Iranian air defense and has to make this desperate emergency landing with one engine completely destroyed.
And the A-10 is a particularly vital data point here, I think.
Oh, for sure.
Because the entire design philosophy of the A-10 is survivability. I mean, it literally flies built around a massive titanium bathtub.
Right, the titanium bathtub.
Yeah, it's designed specifically to protect the pilot and critical flight systems from anti-aircraft artillery and ground fire.
Right, the A-10 was built for the Cold War, to chew through Soviet tank columns while taking heavy damage. It's famous for flying home missing half a wing.
Exactly.
So if an airframe like that is taking critical mission-ending damage, it means the nature of the air defense they are facing isn't just, small arms fire from some guys on the ground.
No, not at all.
They're facing sophisticated man-pads, man-portable air defense systems, or heavier surface-to-air missiles that can actually defeat that titanium armor.
And that signals a massive doctrinal shift. Since Operation Desert Storm in 1991, American military doctrine has relied on the absolute assumption of complete control of the air.
Yeah.
The expectation is that close air support, like what the A-10 provides, can operate with relative impunity once the high-altitude bombers clear out the radar. But the U.S. hasn't fought a technologically capable adversary with a functioning adaptive air defense grid in decades.
And it gets even worse when you look at the secondary effects.
Oh, yeah.
In that same 24-hour window, 2 HH-60W Jolly Green II combat rescue helicopters took hits.
Which is terrifying.
Yeah. They managed to land safely, thankfully, but those are the exact assets you dispatch to retrieve downed pilots.
Right.
If your combat search and rescue, your CSR elements are taking fire, the entire safety net for your pilots is compromised.
Absolutely.
Throw in an F-16 and a Stratotanker, both declaring emergencies and landing in Iraq and Israel respectively, and you have an airspace that is fundamentally lethal to coalition forces.
And the comparison Vaush makes to the Iraqi military during the Gulf War is really illustrative here.
Okay, yeah.
The U.S. systematically dismantled Iraq's forces in '91, but Iraq was fighting a conventional static defense.
Right.
Iran today possesses highly mobile asymmetrical technologies, specifically advanced drone tracking systems and modernized surface-to-air platforms that completely changed the geometry of the airspace.
Which brings us to the human cost of that changing geometry. Because when that F-15E was hit, it wasn't just a loss of a multi-million-dollar airframe.
Right, there's a crew.
According to the CNN reporting, while the pilot appears to have been rescued, the weapons systems officer, the WSO, who sits in the backseat managing the radar and munitions, is missing in action.
Yeah, that's the really grim part of this.
And Iranian state media, specifically the Fars news agency, immediately broadcasted a $60,000 bounty for their capture. They are actively exhorting civilians to hunt them down.
It's chilling. And CNN brought in retired Lieutenant Colonel Amy McGrath, she's a former combat pilot, to analyze the reality of this situation. The first thing she said we have to understand is the sheer physics of a high-speed ejection.
Right.
It is an incredibly violent, traumatic event.
Yeah, we aren't talking about casually parachuting out of a Cessna here.
Not at all. You are dealing with explosive charges blowing the canopy off, followed by rocket motors slamming the seat out of the aircraft at hundreds of miles per hour.
Good Lord.
The G-forces alone frequently cause spinal compression fractures, joint dislocations, or severe concussions. So before the WSO even hits the ground, they are likely dealing with significant physical trauma.
And the gear they have to survive with once they hit the ground is minimal, right?
Very minimal.
It's all about a payload calculation.
Yeah.
Every pound of infantry body armor is a pound of fuel or munitions the jet can't carry. The doctrine literally says the plane is the plates. Because they are flying inside an armored jet, they aren't wearing heavy ceramic plates on their bodies.
Exactly. McGrath pointed out they might have an encrypted radio, a sidearm, perhaps a survival knife, and basic medical supplies. That's about it. They are lightly armed, potentially injured, and entirely alone in hostile territory.
See, in the movies, this is the part where the downed aviator ditches their flight suit, steals some local clothes off a clothesline, and just blends in with the locals while hiking to a friendly border.
Right, the Hollywood version.
But strategically and geographically, that is a pure fantasy in this theater, isn't it?
Oh, it is practically impossible.
Yeah.
And primarily due to the geography, McGrath emphasized the sheer scale of Iran. It has the combined landmass of Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan.
Wait, all three combined?
Combined, the Zagros Mountains alone create impassable terrain that disrupts radio communications and makes foot travel agonizingly slow.
That scale is crucial to understand. You can't just hike out of a country the size of 3 massive war zones stitched together.
No, you can't.
And sustaining a combat search and rescue operation deep into that territory? I mean, that requires vulnerable fixed-wing AWACS planes to manage the airspace and mid-air refuelers to keep the helicopters flying.
Exactly.
If the airspace is as contested as we just established with those A-10s and Jolly Greens taking hits, launching a deep penetration rescue mission is essentially a suicide run.
It really is.
Right.
Furthermore, the concept of blending in completely ignores the reality of the information environment. You have a highly motivated civilian population. The state television isn't just passively reporting a downed plane. They are weaponizing the civilian populace with that $60,000 bounty.
Right, and the Vaush broadcast touched on the grim reality here. This WSO's literal job was dropping ordnance on Iranian infrastructure. The local population doesn't need much ideological pushing to hand over the person they view as responsible for bombing their cities.
Yep.
But you know what terrifies me the most? The speed of this information.
Oh, it's unprecedented.
During the Gulf War, if a pilot went down, it was a crisis, sure, but it took days for Iraqi state TV to parade them on camera.
But the information war has accelerated to near-light speed now.
Yeah.
The Vaush broadcast noted that within 15 minutes of the ejection, 15 minutes, photos of the damaged F-15 ejection seat were not only posted online, but they were geolocated by open-source intelligence accounts and circulating globally.
That completely collapses the ODI loop. You know, the observe, orient, decide, act cycle.
Yes. Exactly.
The Pentagon hasn't even oriented to the fact that the plane is missing yet, and internet sleuths have already decided where the seat landed and acted by broadcasting it to the world.
And that permanently alters the strategic value of a captured service member. They are no longer just a prisoner of war to be held for leverage or, interrogated for tactical secrets. Right. They are immediately converted into high-value viral propaganda. The psychological impact on the domestic American public of seeing a smartphone video of a captured American aviator is immense. And it's a scenario the Pentagon's current command structure seems entirely unequipped to manage.
Man, if the airspace is a meat grinder and our search and rescue networks are paralyzed by both geography and social media, you would at least hope the troops on the ground are safe.
You would hope?
You know, the ones stationed at these massive multi-billion-dollar U.S. military installations. But The Intercept's investigative report completely detonates that assumption, too. We are seeing a doctrinal nightmare where troops are abandoning fortified bases to hide in luxury hotels.
It sounds absurd, but it's true. The Intercept details how U.S. bases across the Middle East. We're talking Bahrain, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and the UAE. They are all being systematically hammered by Iranian ballistic missiles and one-way attack drones.
Okay, I need to push back here, or at least ask for the mechanism. We have spent billions on air defense.
Oh, absolutely.
We have Patriot missile batteries, THAAD systems, CRAMs, the phalanx guns that shoot down incoming mortars. How are cheap one-way attack drones penetrating bases that are supposed to be absolute fortresses?
Well, it comes down to asymmetrical economics and the literal physics of radar.
Okay, break that down.
Traditional air and missile defense systems like the Patriot PAC-3 are designed to track and intercept high-altitude, high-speed ballistic missiles or fighter jets they look up.
Right.
But these Iranian attack drones, which are often variations of the Shahed family, are built with fiberglass or radar-absorbent materials. They fly incredibly low to the ground. They use the curvature of the Earth and terrain masking to hide from radar until the very last second.
Oh, wow. So they get lost in the ground clutter. The radar literally can't tell the difference between a low-flying drone and a flock of birds or like a truck on a highway until it's way too late.
Exactly.
And the economics of that are brutal.
Precisely. Or rather, the cost-exchange ratio is just unsustainable. You are firing a $3 to $4 million Patriot interceptor missile to shoot down a drone that costs perhaps $20,000 to manufacture.
That is insane.
Right. Iran can simply launch swarm attacks, overwhelming the radar systems and completely exhausting the magazine depth of the base's interceptors.
But the threat of drone swarms isn't exactly new. according to the analysis provided by former CNDACOM head General Joseph Votel and defense analyst Jennifer Kavanaugh in the Intercept piece. This threat was glaringly obvious during the 2016 campaign against ISIS.
Yeah, Votel explicitly stated that it was a known expectation that Iran would retaliate against our installations using exactly these methods.
They knew.
They knew. Yet, according to Kavanaugh's research, the Pentagon fundamentally failed to adequately harden these bases. They prioritized funding for offensive strike capabilities and high-end naval assets, and they just chose not to invest in the necessary localized defensive infrastructure like robust CRAM networks or advanced microwave anti-drone systems to actually protect the troops on the ground.
Which leads to the most dystopian detail in this entire stack of sources.
Yeah, the hotels, right.
Because the bases are utterly vulnerable to these drone swarms, U.S. troops are literally fleeing military installations. They're renting out civilian hotel rooms and office buildings across the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC states, just to hide.
It completely upends military logistics and force protection. Think about it. You have the most heavily funded military apparatus in human history, and its personnel are dispersed across Marriott's and Hilton's because their heavily fortified bases cannot stop a low and slow fiberglass drone.
And it isn't just a theoretical vulnerability either. The Intercept highlighted a specific devastating incident where an Iranian drone struck the luxury Crown Plaza Hotel in Manama, Bahrain.
Yeah.
That strike wounded 2 War Department employees. You have drone strikes hitting luxury hotels in the capital city of an allied nation.
And the tactical implications of that are catastrophic. As General Votel pointed out, when you scatter your forces into civilian infrastructure, you massively degrade command and control.
Of course you do.
You cannot run a synchronized, highly complex military campaign when your logistics officers and intelligence analysts are trying to coordinate over hotel Wi-Fi. It destroys unit cohesion and drastically increases response times.
Beyond the tactical nightmare, the geopolitical optics are a total gift to Iranian information warfare.
Oh, absolutely.
Iran's foreign minister, Sayyid Abbas Araghchi, took to social media to explicitly accuse the United States of using Arab civilians in these GCC hotels as human shields.
It is a highly calculated psychological operation.
Yeah.
By stating that the U.S. is deliberately embedding its military personnel among civilian populations to deter strikes, Iraqi is attempting to fracture the diplomatic alliances between the U.S. and the GCC states. He even publicly urged GCC hotel management to deny bookings to U.S. military officers to, quote, protect their customers.
Man, that puts those host nations in an impossible position. They rely on the U.S. security umbrella, but they cannot afford to have their civilian economic centers turned into legitimate military targets.
Exactly.
And General Votel acknowledged exactly this fear, that by operating out of civilian infrastructure, the U.S. is inadvertently blurring the lines of the laws of armed conflict, giving Iran the justification they need to strike commercial centers.
And you know, the strategic chaos of hiding troops in hotels naturally begs a darker question.
Which is?
If the physical defenses of these bases are failing this visibly and the command structure is this degraded, what else is failing that we aren't seeing?
Right.
The Intercept's investigation suggests the failure isn't just tactical, it's informational.
Yes. This brings us to the core allegation of Nick Turse's reporting. The casualty numbers.
Yeah.
Because if bases are taking hits from ballistic missiles, if hotels are getting struck by drones and planes are falling out of the sky, the official numbers simply do not align with the physics of the battlefield.
No, they really don't.
The Intercept asserts that the Pentagon and CENTCOM are actively engaged in what a defense official anonymously called a casualty cover-up.
The discrepancy in the data is massive. CENTCOM put out an official statement claiming roughly 303 U.S. service members had been wounded since the start of Operation Epic Fury.
Okay.
However, the Intercept's exhaustive independent analysis puts that number at nearly 750 troops killed or wounded since October 2023.
It feels exactly like a massive corporation cooking its books ahead of a quarterly earnings report.
That's a great analogy.
Right. The CEO gets on a mic and tells shareholders, hey, we had a great quarter, losses are minimal. But they achieve that pristine balance sheet by quietly transferring a massive catastrophic loss into some offshore shell company that the auditors aren't allowed to look at.
That corporate accounting metaphor is entirely accurate for how CENTCOM is allegedly structuring these reports. The Intercept breaks down the specific administrative tricks being used.
Walk us through those.
So, for instance, CENTCOM issued a formal casualty statement on a Monday. However, the data in that statement was deliberately cut off 3 days prior. By using that artificially truncated timeline, they conveniently omitted 15 troops who were wounded in a Friday drone attack on Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia.
So they didn't technically lie about the Friday numbers. They just constructed a bureaucratic reality where Friday didn't exist yet for the press pool.
Exactly. It is omission by administrative delay. But the omissions get significantly larger.
Right. The carrier incident.
Yeah, the current CENTCOM figures completely exclude the catastrophic incident aboard the USS Gerald R. Ford.
This is a vital point to expand on. The sources note over 200 sailors were injured or suffered severe smoke inhalation from a massive fire aboard the Ford, which forced the carrier to limp degrees for repairs.
Yeah.
Naval firefighting is arguably the most brutal, confined space combat imaginable. A carrier is essentially a floating city packed with jet fuel and high explosives. If a fire breaks out, you can't evacuate. Every single sailor is a firefighter.
And smoke inhalation in the deep, unventilated compartments of an aircraft carrier isn't just coughing. It is severe, long-term lung damage and chemical exposure.
Right. Yet because those injuries weren't necessarily the direct kinetic result of an enemy missile striking the hull, perhaps the fire started from an operational failure during combat maneuvers, the Pentagon appears to be exploiting a categorization loophole to erase those 200 sailors from the official combat casualty tally.
But the most egregious accounting trick, like the ultimate offshore shell company in our corporate metaphor, is the shadow army of civilian contractors.
Oh, absolutely.
We always talk about troops, but modern American warfare relies entirely on private contractors for logistics, maintenance, base security, and intelligence analysis.
And The Intercept obtained official U.S. statistics showing almost 12,900 cases of injuries to contractors in the CENTCOM area of responsibility in 2024 alone.
12,900 casualties that just do not exist in the political discourse.
They're totally invisible.
And of those, more than 3,700 were classified as serious, non-fatal injuries. We are talking about events requiring more than a week away from work, which frequently indicates traumatic brain injuries, TBIs, from the concussive overpressure of missile strikes hitting near their housing units.
Wow.
Furthermore, 18 contractors were killed in Iraq.
And none of these people are included in the headline numbers the Pentagon feeds to the White House press corps.
None of them.
There's a really dark historical precedent here. Back during the Iraq War, relying on private military companies like Blackwater gave the government plausible deniability. Contractor deaths didn't trigger the same public mourning or political blowback as a draped flag over a military casket. It seems the Pentagon has basically institutionalized that loophole to hide the true attrition rate of this war.
If you aggregate the fractional number of known contractor injuries with the independent estimates of military casualties, The Intercept suggests the actual casualty count for Americans and those operating on U.S. bases might top 13,600.
That is staggering.
And Jennifer Kavanaugh, the defense analyst in the piece, frames this not just as a military issue, but as a profound crisis of democratic consent.
I mean, it is the American taxpayer funding this trillion-dollar apparatus. You have a fundamental right to know the true cost in blood and treasure.
Exactly. When the government intentionally obscures the bodies and hides the concussions, it deliberately distorts the public's perception of the conflict's success and necessity.
Yeah.
A democracy cannot have an informed, rational debate about whether a war is worth fighting or continuing if the electorate is being fed doctored spreadsheets about how many of their own citizens are bleeding to sustain it.
And that deliberate distortion brings us to the inevitable collision between the grim, undeniable reality of the battlefield and the volatile politics of Washington. Because, let's be real, you can only hide a reality this massive for so long before the sheer weight of the casualties starts bending the political gravity.
Oh, we are already seeing the political fallout cascade in real time. According to the Vaush source, public support for the war with Iran has plummeted by a rapid 8 points.
8 points is a lot.
It is huge, and the trajectory continues downward as alternative media sources puncture the official narrative.
And in response to that collapsing support, the administration's strategic goals are suffering from severe whiplash.
Yeah, that was wild to read.
The sources highlight that President Trump's stated aims at the onset of Operation Epic Fury were maximalist, regime change level objectives. He was promising freedom for the people of Iran, demanding unconditional surrender, and explicitly talking about taking the oil in Iran.
He even declared at one point that the war would last as long as necessary to achieve lasting peace throughout the entire Middle East. It was a commitment to total generational warfare.
But suddenly, as the bases get hit and the planes fall, The Intercept reports that Trump teased he would wind down the entire war in as little as 2 weeks.
2 weeks?
The goalposts haven't just been moved, they've been strapped to a rocket and fired in the opposite direction. Going from unconditional surrender and seizing the oil to we're out in 14 days implies a massive internal panic regarding the sustainability of the conflict.
That panic is visibly fracturing the civil-military divide, too. The sources point to a highly revealing moment involving Secretary of War Pete Hegseth.
Oh, right, the press conference.
Yeah, during a Pentagon press conference addressing the drone strikes on U.S. bases, Hegseth offered a televised prayer asking that the almighty and eternal arms of Providence stretch over the troops and protect them.
Which, on its face, plays well to a certain domestic political base.
Yeah.
But to the military professionals actually managing the logistics of these undefended bases, it was insulting.
Precisely. The Intercept quotes an anonymous defense official who reacted to Hegseth's prayer with absolute fury.
What do they say?
They stated, "Why didn't Hegseth protect them? Anyone with a brain knew these attacks were coming."
Wow.
It exposes a deep, toxic rift. You have political appointees managing the optics and offering prayers, while the operational commanders are furious that they were denied the funding for CRAMs and anti-drone defenses for years.
And the cultural and political optics surrounding the casualties are becoming just as inflamed. The Vaush broadcast scrutinized some deeply controversial comments from the administration.
Right.
We're discussing the first Americans killed in the conflict. President Trump reportedly said, "When you have conflicts like this, you always have death," and claimed grieving parents had begged him to finish the job.
Vaush also highlighted a specific incident regarding military decorum. He noted that President Trump wore a blue suit, a red tie, and a bowl cap to the dignified transfer of fallen soldiers at Dover Air Force Base.
Which Vaush argued is a severe violation of the expected standard for decorum of the dead within military culture. The contrast between the solemn, highly regimented military mourning process and the casual political attire deeply offended certain segments of the defense community.
Yeah.
And this leads to a profound analytical concept that Vaush introduces about the mechanics of the cover-up itself. He calls it the rubber band effect of casualty reporting.
I thought that was a brilliant metaphor. The rubber band effect perfectly illustrates the limit of information control.
Right.
The theory is that you can hide an injury almost indefinitely. You can treat a soldier for a traumatic brain injury in secret, heal them in a classified ward, and send them back to duty without ever issuing a press release. You can stretch that reality. But a death fundamentally snaps the rubber band. A death requires a body to be accounted for.
Exactly. A death isn't just a number on a spreadsheet that C&T-Com can delay reporting. There are parents waiting for phone calls. There are spouses expecting letters. The absence becomes undeniable proof.
Every single day the government delays announcing a combat death, they are pulling that rubber band tighter. The longer the delay, the more explosive the public reaction when the truth inevitably snaps back.
Yeah.
And Vaush takes this to its darkest logical conclusion. What happens if the government, terrified of the political fallout of rising death tolls, simply stops looking for the missing?
He speculates on a horrific worst-case scenario. If a helicopter goes down in the Zagros Mountains, or a WSO is missing in action, does the Pentagon quietly abandon the rescue effort and leave the bodies in the desert just to keep the official death toll static for another news cycle?
It is the ultimate collision of political survival and military ethics. Vaush argues that while certain domestic political bases might excuse shifting rhetoric or tactical failures, the tangible, undeniable act of abandoning American service members to die to protect a political narrative would absolutely shatter whatever remains of the social contract between the military and the civilian leadership.
It would trigger uncontrollable systemic outrage.
Yes.
Because you can spin a bad poll number, you could reclassify a contractor injury.
Yeah.
But you cannot spin an abandoned body.
No, you can't. So let's synthesize all of these data points.
Yeah.
We've moved from the high-altitude airspace down to the desert floor, from the logistics hubs in Bahrain to the briefing rooms in Washington. What these sources collectively reveal is a conflict where decades of deeply held assumptions about American military omnipotence are violently disintegrating upon contact with reality.
We are seeing A-10 Warthog planes designed to survive the apocalypse limping home with dead engines.
Yeah.
We are watching multi-billion-dollar base infrastructures rendered entirely useless by $20,000 drones, forcing the most advanced military in the world to coordinate a war from the lobbies of civilian hotels.
It's wild.
And presiding over all of this is a Pentagon seemingly so desperate to obscure the true human cost of these failures that they are hiding casualties and potentially alienating their own officer corps.
It is a profound structural crisis, not just of military capability, but of institutional credibility.
It's an immense amount of heavy information to process. But there is one final provocative concept we want to leave you with, something to mull over on your own that builds on the reality we've just unpacked.
We call it the open source trap. Throughout this analysis, we've explored how the government is utilizing every bureaucratic trick available to hide casualties, doctor spreadsheets, and spin a narrative of absolute control.
Right.
But we no longer live in 1991. We live in an era where an Iranian civilian can stumble across a smoking ejection seat, snap a high-definition photo on their phone, geolocate the metadata, and broadcast it to the entire globe before a Pentagon spokesperson even steps up to the podium.
The monopoly on wartime truth is dead. The state can no longer bottleneck the flow of information the way they did during the Gulf War or the early days of the War on Terror. The battlefield is entirely transparent, instantly accessible, and ruthlessly unfiltered.
So the question for you to consider as you watch this conflict evolve is this. If world powers can no longer hide the brutal, moment-to-moment, blood-soaked realities of war from their citizens, if the bodies, the burning planes, and the strikes on hotels are instantly visible on everyone's screens, will this unavoidable transparency make governments inherently more hesitant to initiate wars in the first place?
Or, faced with the inability to spin the narrative, will governments simply invent more extreme, draconian methods to control the internet and choke off the flow of information itself? Think about that smiling civilian taking a selfie next to the ejection seat. In the future, will the government be forced to stop the plane from crashing, or will they just figure out how to stop you from ever seeing the picture?